The phrase Green New Deal is on a lot of lips today. It was invented by the Green Party years ago, but it has received major national attention now since a member of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has taken it up as a battle cry. Richard Smith is an economic historian, a founder of System Change, Not Climate Change, and author of the book Green Capitalism, The God That Failed. He wrote an article on newpolitics.org called An Eco-Socialist Path to Limiting Global Climate Temperature Rise to 1.5%. And I thought it was excellent, and so we're going to talk about it today. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you, Stan?
Good.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you say we're in a climate emergency and call for drastic action to stop global temperature rise. What's the emergency?
As was reported a few days ago, emissions increase has gone up in 2018, is on course to grow by 2% this year instead of falling. In China, it's on course to grow 4.7%, which is really huge, given that China's emissions are more than twice the level of U.S. emissions. So that's really a shock. In the IPCC special report in October, stated in no uncertain terms that we must immediately suppress fossil. We have to take steps to immediately suppress fossil fuel production and consumption. And they proposed that they usually don't get into the economics of this, but in this case they did. They proposed that what governments should do is ramp up carbon taxes to very steep levels, to as much as $135 a ton, or even $5,500 a ton, or even more. So that prompted me to write this article, because this seems to me like this is, as we've just seen in the case of Washington State, which failed to pass a carbon tax, and in France, where a carbon tax provoked riots. Strikes me as a very wrong-headed way to go about the problem.
Well, why is that a problem? I mean, you get a guy like James Hansen, the great climate scientist.
Right.
He says we could gradually increase carbon taxes, give all the money raised back to the people, and that would get the economy out of carbon in a hurry. But you say this is a fantasy. Why?
Well, there are lots of reasons why. There are lots of problems with the carbon tax. First of all, it's a flat tax, so it just hurts. It hits poor people worse than rich people. They can still drive their big cars and say that they don't care if they pay an extra 15 cents a gallon for gasoline. But that's not the worst of the problems. The problems are that look, with a carbon tax, if it's too low, it doesn't affect the change you want to make. It doesn't force people to change. On the other hand, if it's high enough to force changes, then people balk, and there are protests, and they vote down bills for that, or they riot and that sort of thing. So the IPCC proposed a sharp tax on the order of $135 a gallon. That would $135 a ton. That would work out to $1.20 a gallon, and $5,500 a ton would work out to $48.95 a gallon. Can you imagine that? What they're saying, though, is that the taxes that have been imposed, they're like more than 40 countries and states have imposed. 42 states, the OECD reported that across 42 major economies that have imposed carbon taxes as of this year in 2018, they're all an average of about 7 cents a gallon. This is just way too low to have any impact. Mm-hmm. But the problem is no government will set a tax high enough to spur really deep changes, because to do so, that will result in protests and riots. And why? Because look, you know, like somebody wrote about France. You've got these workers who live out in the countryside, and they have one guy who interviewed. He says he has to drive 30 miles to 30 kilometers to get to a train station to get to work. Well, he has no choice but to drive that. And the carbon tax hits him the worst because he's a working class guy and he's not rich, so he has to just pay the tax. But the tax is not going to give him a free electric car. And he can't afford an electric car. They're already strapped, French workers. So they're already paying heavy taxes, and they can't afford to go out and change to, just sell their regular car and buy an electric car. So this is the problem everywhere, that you can't impose these taxes on people without providing them alternatives and ways so that they can actually transition. It's easy to say, oh, we'll just drive carbon out of the market by raising the tax, but you're hitting real investors and real people. If you put heavy enough tax on the companies to actually make them collapse, which is what you would have to do if you want to. Look, if you want to get fossil fuels out of the world economy, through carbon taxes, you'd have to drive them out of business. Mm-hmm. Well, that would just cause economic collapse and mass unemployment. Who wants that? No government will do that.
So you're saying capitalism has this problem that the market really can't fix this problem on its own?
This is not a problem. The market is the wrong way to go about the problem. The way to go about the problem is to ration fossil fuels, like was done under Roosevelt in World War II. They rationed fossil fuels, and they gave people a ration coupon, and they diverted the fossil fuels for use for the war effort. So it was only for 4 years or something during the war, but that's what they did, but it worked, and it was equitable. It affected rich and poor alike, and so that's what people did. But of course, rationing fossil fuels can have limits in certain situations. If you need to work a long way away from work and you're only allowing you a gallon to get there and back, and it's not enough, then you'd have to have more ration coupons. But that could be worked out in principle. But the main problem is the problem is that we have a world economy. Let's just take the U.S. economy. It's based on fossil fuels everywhere. It's completely across the industries. And there are huge companies, the wealthiest companies in the country, the oil companies, the auto companies, and so on. These companies, you can't just drive these people out of business with a carbon tax or force them out. What you need to do is nationalize them. You have to take them into public hands, because we need to close down oil production, phase it out drastically and quickly. And the only fair way to do this is to buy out those companies and provide guaranteed jobs for those workers in those companies in another line of work, hopefully low carbon work, that pays them the same benefits and same wages and benefits they get in their current jobs. We don't have time to. I'm not proposing that we expropriate the oil companies and the auto companies and the airlines and so forth like that. That's not fair, because what you need to do is just buy them out. And we can buy them out because, as I showed, just the tax giveaway that Trump did, his $2.3 billion tax gift to the rich, is enough to buy all the oil companies in America, all the coal companies, all the major industrial consumers of fossil fuels.
Except I think you said billion. I think you mean trillion?
Trillion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 2.3 trillion. Yes, right. That's enough to buy out all the oil companies and coal companies. They're worth about $980 billion. To buy out the airlines, all the airlines and Boeing aircraft, and all the auto companies and the major chemical companies and so on. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. I was actually surprised to see how cheap this would be. I mean, it's like a $17 trillion economy, and yet you could buy up the government could buy up the commanding heights of the economy for like $3 trillion, less than that.
And with the stock market falling and falling as it's been doing the last week and today, it's cheaper. Even cheaper.
Yeah, but the thing is that I'm not. The point is here, I'm not trying to. I don't want to. I'm not trying to sound like a Bolshevik here. We're not looking to seize the means of production and throw people out of work and throw the capitalists in jail. No, that's not it. Because you have to take into consideration that lots of oil stocks are owned by workers in their pension fund plans. And we need to do this in a hurry, so we don't want to fight a class war over nationalization. What we want to do is make it, buy them out at a price they can't resist. And the oil companies, because most of their assets are stranded, and they're pumping it right now as fast as they can because they know they're stranded and they know they're not going to be able to sell this for a long time. They might actually welcome a buyout. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the point is that we have to have a strategy for suppressing fossil fuels that is not based on carbon taxes and cap and trade and those kind of punitive things. And as far as I can see, the only practical alternative for this is to buy out these companies, have the government buy them out, and they can pay for it by rescinding these tax giveaways to the rich, and create a massive WPA-type jobs program to reemploy all the workers in those industries, in other industries, things that we do need, like renewable energy, all kinds of things, and create simultaneously a crash program to transition to renewable energy. Because renewable energy is just massively underinvested in this country and the world in general. I mean, all the money goes into fossil fuels. But renewable energy is massively underinvested, so we need to really invest in that and make the transition. There's no technical reason, no technical barrier here to transitioning to renewable energy. It can all be done. The technology is adequate to the task. We just need the money to do it and the will, because people have to be willing to say, okay, so we're going to cashier this oil-based industry. That means we're going to have to give up driving humongous gas hog SUVs and gigantic Suburbans, all this kind of stuff that you see. I live in New York, and the streets are filled with these humongous trucks and cars people are driving around. It's so crazy. I don't know why they do this.
And they run over people, pedestrians, and every week you hear about a few.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a waste of materials and resources and fuel to drive people around in these ginormous trucks. They're the best-selling so-called cars in America.
Now, is this something Ocasio-Cortez is pushing, or are you pushing it to the next level?
Well, Ocasio-Cortez has put forward a Green New Deal program, which is centrally based around the idea of decarbonization. Mm-hmm. It doesn't specify how we should decarbonize this economy. And no one has come up with a way to do it except the IPCC's proposal for carbon taxes. And by the way, you mentioned James Hansen. James Hansen has a variant on this. But Hansen's variant is carbon tax plus dividend. That is, you'll pay a carbon tax. So I addressed that in a footnote in my paper, in which I said, well, the average American pay at a carbon tax rate of some percent. The average American would pay something like $660 a year in carbon tax fee, and then they would get back that $660 at the end of the year in Hansen's plan. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is that they could just as easily go spend that $600 on a round trip flight to Cancun, or a new flat-screen TV, which produces a lot of CO2 emissions to produce. In other words, there's nothing to prevent people from spending that money on other goods and services which would produce just as much carbon as what they saved on their carbon tax. In fact, if they took the jet to Cancun, it's $298 round trip from New York, so they could take 2 tickets for what they saved, a family. And so they would create more carbon in result from taking that little vacation with the money they saved on their carbon tax than if they'd just driven their car.
Yeah. Well, you conclude the article by talking about an eco-socialist civilization. I take that's a break from previous versions of socialism?
Well, yeah, I think socialism and Marxist theories of socialism and so forth were largely based on the assumption that economies would continue to grow. I mean, Marx had many very interesting caveats to that. Many very interesting discussions of of ecology before it was a word, and so that's true. But still, the main tendency of socialists in the 20th century was to think that the economy will keep growing. And so we just have to face the ecological truth, which is that we can't have a perpetually growing economy on a finite planet. Mm-hmm. So that means we're going to have an economy that's geared to minimizing resources rather than maximizing consumption of them, and planning ahead for conservation of resources for future generations of people, and planning systematically to set aside resources for other flora and fauna on this planet that we share with them. So we need a different conception of socialism, which is based on what we in the eco-socialist movement call eco-socialism, which is basically a combination of you could say ecology or environmentalism and socialism. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the basic ideas. But there's a whole bunch of books and articles people can look at on that.
Great. Hey, I really appreciate talking with you about your article.
Thank you. Pleasure talking with you.
All right. Bye-bye.